I'm not double parked, I'm single parked. It's water, it's boring. I'm so thirsty. Yes. So I was going to say that there is a poutineerie of Canadians in the room this evening. That's what I'm calling the collective noun for all of us. Hi. I've had a career change since the last time I spoke here. The first time I spoke at Nerd Night, I was talking about spinal cord injury, I think. And we're going to talk about something entirely different today. So, hi, I'm Michelle. I use she, them pronouns. I titled this Heart of Darkness because I now spend a lot of my time working in the field of anatomy, and I predominantly teach anatomy to medical students. And I thought, oh, this is like a fun play on words for dark anatomy, but it actually references a story written, a novella by Joseph Conrad in 1899. It was the inspiration of Francis Ford Coppola's infamous film, Apocalypse Now, and it was published across four issues of Blackwood's magazine and deals with something that's at the center of my talk tonight. So the story is about a steamship captain for a Dutch company while they're exploring and, dare I say, exploiting inner Africa. And although there's a lot of horrible things that happen in this novella, central to this is actually, the author was well ahead of their time. Central to this is looking at differences amongst humans. And the whole point of the novella, really at the heart of it, was thinking about how civilized people are not that different from uncivilized peoples. So drawing this parallel between all of us being both civilized and not at the same time, that we are all equal irrespective of that. And that's really at the heart of what I'm talking about today. But before we jump in, I'm just going to give a quick trigger warning, because in tonight's talk, if you've read the bio, we're going to talk about some really hard stuff. I'm going to swear a fucking lot, because this shit is hard. So we are going to talk about death and dying. I am going to show images of deceased individuals, both photographic images and illustrated images. We are going to talk about slavery. We're going to talk about consent or the lack thereof. We are going to talk about Nazis. We're going to talk about the Holocaust. We're going to talk about a lot of really heavy, hard things. But here's my favorite author. I know we're not a literary bunch. We already established that earlier. This is Neil Gaiman. Yay! Neil. Yes, okay. My favorite fiction author. And I put him up here not just because he wrote a book called Trigger Warning, so it's a clever lead-in, but also because the world is full of really heinous individuals, and I'm going to talk about some of them tonight, but also full of really wonderful, amazing humans that give us escapist novels and graphic novels and allow us to see the wonderful creativity and wonderful humanity that we all have. Again, whether we are civilized or savage, we are all the same. So let's just dive in, shall we? I've already said I'd spend a lot of my time now teaching anatomy, and specifically I teach medical students. That's most of my portfolio. And I love these two images because they're both from the University of Melbourne, so shout out to my employer. Former employer, RMIT, so there's like a couple of RMIT folks here as well. All right, this is, interestingly, same room. Same room. This building still exists. So I teach in this space, same room as 1905. That's a photograph taken of third-year medical students. You may notice some things about that photograph. There's a certain demographic represented in that photograph. But the point of what I wanted to illustrate with this photo in particular is you see a group of medical students, almost exclusively male, almost exclusively white. I don't think women were allowed in the medical program at that time, but there they are dissecting a human. And by dissecting this cadaver, that is predominantly how they're learning anatomy. And cadaveric dissection is still a cornerstone of the discipline. We still do it today. I still teach dissection to medical students. But there's a lot of other resources that we utilize as well. So this is not an actual photo of a lab. This is clearly a promo shot. But these are some of our biomedical science students. And they do use a ton of different resources. There's plastic resources, there's high-tech imaging resources, digital resources, hands-on resources, all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, all of them are actually still based on cadaveric anatomy at some stage in their origin. How do we actually teach anatomy? So I just said cadaveric dissection is a cornerstone of our discipline, so we do that quite a lot. But it's a little more full than that, right? So my teaching practice, I employ 3 sort of arms to it. There's guided learning, also known as lectures. That's a bad word nowadays, actually. But guided learning can be lectures in front like this, your traditional lecture in a lecture theater. It can also be recorded lectures, e-learning modules, all of those sorts of things. But it means an expert transmitting information. And then there's visual resources. And visual resources take a number of different types as well. So there's some that are digital. This one is actually Complete Anatomy. It's an app that anyone can download. You can get a free trial now. And it allows you to build a virtual skeleton in 3D, spin it around, some information comes up. It's all very flash, all based on actual human anatomy. Fantastic. There's also illustrations. And the illustrations are usually part of textbooks called anatomy atlases. And they work like any other kind of atlas. It's a map of the body. And they're usually based on illustrations of dissected human cadavers. And they're labeled so you can see which parts are which, right? And the last of these is prosection dissection. Again, I said dissection is something we still do. Prosection is a professionally prepared human specimen. So it is a cadaver that has been professionally dissected, embalmed, in order to highlight particular structures. In this case, you're looking at structures at the superficial part of the lower limb and the foot. So all of these are encapsulated in anatomy education, particularly for medical students. They have all of these resources, but they spend most of their time with visual resources. Obviously, you can't spend all of your life in the anatomy lab. It's a limited resource. Our human body donors are a limited and exceptional, very special resource. So they don't get access to it that often. Spend a lot of time with visual resources. And visual resources have an origin story. So X-rays, in this case, one of the fundamental, we talked, our earlier speaker, was it Sarah, spoke about fMRIs and MRI machines and CT scans. So these are a great way of looking inside the body without having to dissect the body. But it all began with X-rays back at the beginning of the 20th century, late 1800s, early 1900s. And it's come a long way. So this is a 3D rendering of a CT scan. Get popped in a CT scanner, CT scan comes out, you can render it in 3D. Amazing. It's truly awesome stuff that you've got this incredible depth of information. But again, all of this is based on some stage, a human, a living human, or a human who has died. It all has a human origin. And all of these resources come from some sort of past, some human past. And we're going to talk a little bit about the problematic origin stories of some of the chief resources that have been or still are used in medical education today. And how we train our doctors is really important because it affects what our healthcare looks like on the other side. So keep that thought in the back of your head as we work through these. And here's where shit gets really hard, friends. All right, so we're going to start with my good friend, Richard Berry. Not a good friend. I don't know him. I don't particularly like him. He was a professor of anatomy at the University of Melbourne, so I spend a lot of time seeing his name all over the damn place. It has been removed from a building. So he was nominally an anatomist, a neurologist, and an anthropologist. I debate all of that. He was a heinous eugenicist and had these amazing political ambitions. What a combo. So this dude, this lovely individual. So what he loved to do was measure people's skulls. So he would measure the diameter of skulls. And he would do this and then correlate it to some metric of intelligence. And wouldn't you know it, he decided that individuals with smaller skull diameters were of lower intellect. And then his political ambitions kicked in. And he thought, you know what, I'm going to try to pass a law. This is in Victoria, by the way. Tried to pass a law that allowed the segregation of individuals into different education strata based on measures of their skull because it correlated with their brain size, of course, and therefore their intelligence. And we can all guess where First Nations individuals ended up on this scale. So this is the basis, the anatomical basis by which he justified legalizing the forced sterilization of First Nations women because they were of lower intellect. It had nothing to do with the fact that they didn't know the language, right? Oh no, definitely lower intellect. So the other thing that this lovely erudite individual did, stole remains both from across Australia and the Indian bone trade, and kept those remains in the medical education repository. The university has since actually returned all of the First Nations remains. They've been repatriated, so they're no longer at the university. But for generations of doctors trained at the University of Melbourne, they actually got their core anatomical knowledge from bones that were stolen from First Nations people. So how does that impact on what their medical practice ends up looking like, whether they were aware of the origin of this or not? But here's Neil Gaiman. He's in a TARDIS, so that's cool. Shall we meet another one of my favorite anatomists of the past? All right, so this is James Marion Sims. American, nominally, he's a surgeon, I guess, the father of modern gynecology. And I'm sad to admit that this is actually true. So here's an individual who actually had good intentions at his heart. So something that happens quite a lot in pregnancies that have medical complications is vaginal fistulas. And this is a condition whereby there's a tear in the birth canal. It can affect the birth of the baby, but also afterward, it has a hugely detrimental effect on the woman. So massive amounts of incontinence, the entire pelvic floor is effectively non-functional. The woman has difficulty working, difficulty walking. There's almost no chance of having a pregnancy again. This still happens in undeveloped nations today. Our good friend, James Sims, came up with a lot of procedures that are still in use today to treat this condition, to surgically repair this. Awesome. That's actually quite a lot of good work that's come from this. But he pioneered this surgery on non-consenting slaves, and worse still, without anesthesia. And this is a painting of one of the slaves that was documented to have undergone surgery, unconsenting surgery, by our friend, James Sims. Anarcha Westcott, from 1928. We do not know when she passed away. We do not know how she passed away. And there's a bunch of other white doctors there just to make everyone feel a lot better about how things were going back then. But this bears in mind, this brings to me the question of again, there are procedures that are still, he is the founder of modern gynecological procedures. The surgery is still done today exactly how he described it in his early papers. There's something called the Sims position that facilitates birth when there is a problem or labor has gone on for too long. This is still being taught. This is still being practiced. This is helping hundreds of thousands of women, particularly in developed nations. So how do we reconcile that? I don't have an answer for you. What I do have is a picture of Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett, who together, this lovely pair, authored Good Omens, and we can all be thankful for that. And I need everyone to take a really, really deep breath, because the next slide is going to be the hardest slide that I'll probably ever have to talk through in my professional or private career stuff. Are we ready for this? Oh, I just skipped right ahead. I really didn't want this one. All right, so this is where the talk actually started. And I had a chat with Wade, who basically said, please, Michelle, don't talk about Nazi anatomists for 20 minutes. So we're not going to. Edward Pernkopf possibly authored one of the most famous anatomical atlases in existence. It is a 4-volume series. It is beautiful. It is detailed. It is an enormous wealth of human anatomical knowledge. Without a doubt, the most detailed, exceptional piece of knowledge in existence with relation to anatomy. He was a hardcore Nazi. So this is him at his inauguration. So this is his inaugural speech when he was given the role of dean of the medical school at the University of Vienna. These are not phone-in Nazis, by the way. This is not like phone a friend, bring your Nazi regalia. These are the faculty. So this is the faculty at the University of Vienna. And what this fellow did was, when political prisoners were executed, many of which were victims of the Holocaust, the cadavers came to the university, and he had a whole setup of students and professionals that were dissecting the bodies of these cadavers, and then artists and illustrators who were then illustrating and abbreviating and annotating. And it was a whole workflow. And it, again, produced the most incredibly deep body of knowledge for anatomical sciences. It has been the foundation of medical education for hundreds of thousands of doctors. There are no copies in circulation. You can't buy them, except they're all digitized. You can access them. They exist in doctors' offices. Surgeons, really, most surgeons will have a copy of this or have access to a copy of these atlases. But they've educated a lot of people that have done a lot of really good things, right? So we're back to that question of how much good undoes bad. Is that even the right question to be asking? But we need to be thinking about where all of these resources have come from. And there is a legacy to the Pernkopf Atlas. These images on the right, and this is where my whole journey started. These are images I use in my teaching. So I've been teaching anatomy for about a decade. I've used these images a lot. So this horrible atlas is something that has affected my career and my career development. I've learned from it. I've presented with it. You can actually see up in the corners, there's bits of the illustrations where certain regalia, these were swastikas that were actually rubbed out, and these illustrations are still publicized and circulated as part of different textbooks. So we don't even know where all of these images have ended up. They're in all kinds of textbooks all over the world. I've put this image up here. This is one of the more infamous pages from one of the Pernkopf volumes. And on that page, you can clearly see the face of the individual that was dissected for this illustration. And this is believed to be someone who is of Jewish heritage. And the Jewish community has actually spent a lot of time and a lot of effort trying to go back and identify any of the individuals, however they can, as illustrated in the book, to try to give some restitution to families. And there's a lot of debate in the anatomical community, in the medical community, in the ethics community. What do we do with this phenomenal piece of knowledge that was so ill-begotten? And I really don't know the answer to that. And it makes me often feel sick to my stomach that that legacy affects me. I have taught students. I have just carried out these awful things. But I did say before that dissection is the cornerstone of the discipline. And as any anatomist will know, it's not the textbook, it's not the professor, it's not me that teaches anatomy, it is actually another human. And it's the deceased human who has nowadays donated their body. And it is the cadaver that is the best teacher of human anatomy. It is the cadaver from which these students learn most of their anatomy. It is the cadaver that is the first patient of these medical students. And that's a tenet that I take very, very seriously in my education. And knowing that makes it not okay, but makes it a little bit better, knowing where those atlas images have come from. Here's some sausage dogs dressed as sausages running down a hill. Please buy me drinks. Okay. So that's some heinous shit that we've just talked about. But let's talk about what the future looks like, because it is bright and it is genuinely better. Donors and commemoration. I've already alluded to this. So all of Australia, by the way, is at the forefront of this. All of the cadavers and all of the bodies that we use in our education, in our research, in our dissection are from a body donor program. There is a rich and rigorous consent process that goes into it. We know where the origin of every single one of our prosections or dissections. We call them donors. We have names and language to describe them and honor them. And we do so with commemorative services. So that's one of the other great privileges that I have as part of my job, is running a service every single year for the students, for staff, for the families of our donors, to say thanks, for our medical students to reflect on their journeys. They often present their own reflections to say thank you for that donation, for that cadaver who is that first teacher of anatomy. But what about for places that are under-resourced? We're really, really lucky here. We've got a really amazing body donor program. But there are countries, there are places in the world that don't. So this is something that I'm really passionate about. And for all of my donors who have consented to imaging, we've got this fun laser scanner that we can scan any of the parts. We can produce a 3D digital image. I encourage you to scan any of the QR codes. I'm not the only one doing this. Lots of Canadians are doing this, other Canadians. So there's lots of cool things there that you can go in and have a play. It's real human anatomy, it's real cadaveric anatomy. And we can publicize these anywhere. We can make these available to under-resourced countries where perhaps they don't have a way of ethically obtaining human specimens to learn from. And in this way, we can be ethical in making sure that everyone can have equal and equitable access to these resources that are so paramount in our education. And diversity. So I pointed out this image at the beginning of the talk, right? That 100 years ago, there were medical students, they were all male, they were all white. The data set for a lot of our anatomical and, dare I say, scientific knowledge comes from, 21 to 35-year-old white males. This matters. This matters a huge amount because this is the data set that our doctors are trained from. So it's clinical cases, it's anatomical images, it's all of the scientific data that they're afforded in their training. There's a reason why certain demographics fare better with health outcomes. And part of that reason is the training set that doctors are exposed to from the very beginning of their careers. So how do we ensure that this gets better? We increase diversity. I am, by the way, one of 4, maybe there's 6 of us now, female anatomists in the country. So we need more diversity in who's presenting this material. We need more diversity in the material that we're presenting. This is the most commonly used anatomical atlas, not Pernkops. This is Netter's. And beautiful illustrations. It's an illustration, yeah. It could have used any color in the world, but decided that this would be a Caucasian male. It's literally a drawing. Could have been anything. All the way through the textbook, every single image is a Caucasian male. Why? I don't know. Except for the case where it's breasts or pelvis, then it's female. Cool. But there are some textbooks that are doing better and that are increasing representation. So it's not just going to be white people. It's not just going to be males. Awesome. This is amazing. There's so many people that are doing so many good things in this space, and it's so important to train our healthcare professionals on the diversity of human representation. Because this is what our future doctors look like. This is a rural, the Doctor of Medicine course has a rural intake. This is the 2022 intake. Look at these beautiful humans. They look like all kinds of different people. Okay, diversity is still not like amazingly represented. We're still probably looking at a certain segment of society, but still, diversity is on the future. It's coming. It's gonna make everything better for all of us, not just in terms of how we get our anatomy, how we get our training materials, but how those training materials impact each and every single one of our health outcomes moving forward. That's all. I don't have any more Nazis for you, so that's a really good thing. But I wanted to finish off with, these are some shots from the commemorative Thanksgiving service. These are my genuine medical students doing their amazing things, playing instruments to contribute to the service, giving their reflections. And I'm so grateful and so thankful and so honored to be training them. And I'm so thankful to all of the donors who have contributed to the Body Donor Program, who have allowed me to learn from them and to pass that learning on to a whole generation of other young doctors. And I'm sorry if this talk has made you feel uncomfortable or triggered, but I do welcome you to have a conversation with me. I do welcome you to have a conversation with your friends and your family about all of these things, and I'm happy to take some questions. Oh my gosh. I'm also happy to run into people on stage.
All right, wow. Do we have any questions for Michelle? Yes.
Given that the atlas and the gynecology guy and whatever, they were using a specific demographic, homogeneous demographics, are there any particular implications that's had for education on anatomy in those spaces? A bit of a loaded question, sorry.
That's a question that's near and dear to my heart. That's a whole other Nerd Night talk. So I sort of alluded to the fact that female anatomy, even in digital, even modern digital apps, When you select female skeleton, the only thing that comes up is the thorax, which is the chest, and the pelvis. So females in our anatomical resources are pelvises and breasts. Cool. Female anatomy is different in more than just those areas. Different demographics, different racial and ethnic demographics also have different anatomy. So if you think of all of this anatomical learning as foundational, and if the foundation knowledge is so narrow, it has massive implications on their learning. So I have a colleague who just completed a PhD. She actually was an associate professor of anatomy and then retired and then did a PhD looking at female genital anatomy, which is represented in a very specific way in textbooks. And it's influenced the number of young women seeking labiaplasty because they think their labia are abnormal because the anatomy is represented in a very particular way. And doctors are recommending this because doctors during their training have only seen the anatomy represented in a single way. So the depth of the impact, look, I couldn't tell you. I don't know that there's numbers on this, but my impression is that it's hugely widespread. If you've only ever seen anatomy in a specific way, how would you know what normal looks like? What is normal? That didn't really answer your question. Sorry.
Shawnee's got a question. Yeah, so that was how long do you use the donor cadavers for?
Yeah, there was regulations on this. So there's something called the Anatomy Act. So there is legal bounds that we can keep our cadavers for and keep our donors for. Some donors sign off to be kept in perpetuity. And for particularly well-prepared specimens for donors who have signed off on that, we're allowed to keep them as part of our museum collection in perpetuity for forever. We prepare them in particular ways that are for long-term storage. In general, it will be a year or up to 3 years. And then at the end of that timeline, the specimens or the cadavers or the prosections are cremated and the ashes are either returned back to the families if that's what they wish, or there is a rose garden that the body donor program will spread the ashes into the rose garden in a commemorative area.
Yep, again at the back.
Oh, they were promo pictures, so of course they were cherry-picked, absolutely. Do I feel they're representative? Not entirely, no. I think the medical school still ends up, not intentionally, but there's going to be a selection process. Like, thinking about the entry to medical school, you need to have an ATAR that's astronomically high. So you need to be resourced in one way or another through your lifestyle and upbringing and cultural influence in order to achieve that level. And I think there's a whole lot of intersectionality that plays into that. So are we getting a truly representative sample in our medical professionals? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Yeah. Oh yeah, my colleagues are mostly white guys. Most of the students are still white guys. Yeah, no, it happens. It's still a thing.
Yeah, question over here. Yeah, so the question was, how do you reconcile that cadavers throughout history weren't given with consent, even though they were technically the ones teaching anatomy?
I don't. I mean, the short answer is, how do you? How on earth do you? How on earth can you? I think I think I try to do what I can. So with my students, I teach about the lack of diversity and representation. I teach about the historical importance of consent and lack thereof. And every time I'm teaching anatomy, I will ensure that my students, either undergraduate or medical, are aware that there's a problematic past, that these are resources that they're benefiting from that do indeed often have a problematic past. But I don't know that there's a way to reconcile it. Do we stop using these resources altogether? Even if they're doing good, I don't have an answer to that. I talk to a lot of ethicists and I've read a lot of papers, and there's the apologists that say, well, in the historical context, the consent wasn't a thing. It's not right, but it's accurate. I don't have an answer because I don't think I can. I think this is something that gnaws away at me every time I teach. Absolutely. Oh, it makes me feel better that the cadavers, our current cadavers, are the ones that are doing the teaching, not these problematic images, but the ones that were donated with consent are the ones that are now doing the majority of the teaching for our students. And otherwise, we can only educate on problematic pasts.
All right, just at the front here, one last question.
Do you think that anatomy could be correctly taught in the absence of diversity? In other words, what you're inferring is that there are races of people, like Indigenous Australians, Jewish people, etc., etc. And if they're privileged in the data that's used for anatomy, then, and it seems that they are, probably also people that were executed because they were also therapists for doctors, for grandmothers. So do you think anatomy can properly be taught or adequately be taught in the absence of diversity? Or do you think it's flawed because the sample is overwhelmingly from Indigenous people, Jewish people, Europeans?
So the question was, do you think that anatomy can be taught properly without diversity of donors or cadavers in the past?
I mean, fundamentally, what's the definition of properly? Has it been taught that way for centuries? Yes. Has it been successfully taught that way for centuries? Also, yes. So can we? Of course. Should we? Should we continue to do so?
How did you answer your own question about the use of Nazi
Yeah, and there are.
use them? Like you answer.
I don't anymore. I have historically, yes. Once I figured out the origin, I've replaced those images.
Can you tell me why you stopped?
Because I don't feel good about that. I don't know. For me personally, there are individuals, there are surgeons that still refer to these atlases because they are an exceptional wealth of knowledge. Can I do that for my own consciousness? No. And I think there is a certain amount of individual choice that needs to go into that. Can you make those scales balance in your own consciousness, in your own mind, in your own ethical compass? Can you do that? And if you can, go forth. I can't.
All right. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Yeah.